Sarah signed the prenuptial agreement in tears, not from fear, but from a blind love that convinced her she was protecting the man of her life from her own financial burdens. Lara Croft, Julian's mother, watched her sign with a satisfied, icy smile, precisely the kind worn by someone who had just won big in a game Sarah did not even know she was playing. Yet, just 3 months later, when Sarah's father's lawyer called to announce the immense inheritance he had left behind, that triumphant smile shattered on Lara's face. Hold on a moment, before we delve deep into the story that completely transformed Sarah's life. Please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you will not want to miss a single detail about what happened when Sarah uncovered the truth about her family's fortune and the betrayal hidden for decades. Her name is Sarah, and she is about to tell you the story of how a single piece of paper changed everything she thought she knew about love, family, and her own self-worth. Everything began a year earlier. Sarah Vance, a 29-year-old architect brimming with ambition but with empty pockets. Her designs piled up in her rented apartment skyscrapers, innovative living spaces, all remaining on paper. Her most passionate project had just been rejected due to a lack of funding, and she felt as though her entire world was collapsing. Just then, Julian Croft appeared, like a prince stepping out of a fairy tale. Sarah met him at an architectural exhibition. She stood hesitantly before the model of her rejected project, while he approached, looking not at her, but at her work with sincere admiration. "This design is extraordinary," he said, his voice warm and captivating. "It has vision, it has soul. Why has it not been built?" He was Julian Croft, son of Lara Croft, chairman of Croft Enterprises, a colossal real estate empire. He was charming, handsome, and seemed to genuinely see talent in Sarah. They spoke for hours, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt understood. Julian did not merely talk. He financially supported Sarah in establishing a small office, introducing her to his connections. Their relationship developed rapidly. He admired Sarah's passion, and she was captivated by his gentleness and support. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. He was Sarah's hero, the one who had pulled her out of the mire of despair. But then, Sarah met his family. The first dinner at the Croft mansion was like stepping into another world. A cold opulence emanated from the marble walls and crystal chandeliers. Julian's father, Mr. Arthur Croft, was a quiet man, seeming weary, with eyes that constantly avoided hers. His mother, Lara Croft, was entirely different. That first dinner at the Croft mansion felt exactly as though Sarah had landed on another planet. The house was not a home. It was more a museum, ostentatiously displaying wealth in a cold manner. The gleaming marble floors reflected light from colossal crystal chandeliers, making Sarah's every step echo with an odd sense of displacement. Julian's father, Mr. Arthur Croft, was a man of few words with eyes clouded by an indescribable, distant sadness. He shook Sarah's hand politely, but his gaze kept drifting away, as if carrying an invisible burden. And then there was Lara Croft. She was the true queen of this frozen kingdom, a woman with perfectly coiffed platinum hair, sparkling intricate jewelry, and a gaze that could extinguish fire. She swept past Sarah, her sharp eyes scanning her from top to bottom, evaluating everything from the dress Sarah had deliberated over for a week to the shoes she had worked hard to buy on installment. "So you are the architect Julian keeps mentioning," she said, and the word architect from her lips sounded like a mundane profession, a trivial hobby, nothing more. Her smile did not reach her eyes, but Sarah loved him, so she kept trying. She brought them homemade cookies, remembered their birthdays, and bit her lip when Lara made comments about her humble background. She told herself that love would be enough, that they would eventually see her for who she truly was. Throughout dinner, Lara relentlessly fired sugar-coated, poisoned arrows. "Art must be a very fulfilling career, spiritually speaking," she said, intentionally emphasizing fulfilling with subtle sarcasm. "Our Julian is used to being pampered. I hope you do not feel pressured to keep up." Julian tried to smooth things over, defending Sarah a few times, but she could clearly see he was also wary of his mother. He merely dismissed it as an overly worried mother's concern. But what unsettled Sarah most was not Lara's coldness, but Arthur's gaze. Whenever his wife uttered a harsh word, Sarah would glimpse in his eyes a flicker of remorse, a barely concealed pity. That look was a silent warning, a dangerous signal that at the time, too engrossed in love, she had deliberately ignored. Sarah left their mansion that night with a vague sense of unease. But when Julian took her hand, looked at her with affectionate eyes, and said, "Do not mind my mother, I love you for who you are," she chose to believe him. She told herself that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. At that moment, Sarah did not know that she was not entering a family. She was stepping into a trap that had already been laid. Love is an effective anesthetic. It caused Sarah to ignore the silent warnings, dispelling the unease from that evening. Under Julian's protection and affection, she had convinced herself that Lara Croft was simply a difficult mother, and that if only she could prove her worth, Lara would accept her. And then Julian proposed. It did not happen in a luxurious restaurant or a cliché romantic spot. He took Sarah to the construction site of a half-built skyscraper, one of Croft Enterprises' projects. They took the construction elevator to the top floor, where there was nothing but bare steel frames and concrete. The night wind whipped around, blowing Sarah's hair, and below, the entire city lit up like a dazzling galaxy. "Do you see, Sarah?" Julian said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "From here, we can see everything. This is where dreams are built, and my biggest dream is to build a future with you." He turned Sarah to face him, his eyes sparkling more brightly than the city lights. He slowly knelt on the rough concrete floor. Sarah's heart seemed to stop. He opened a velvet box, inside which was an exquisitely designed diamond ring in the Art Deco style that Sarah loved. It was not just a gemstone, it was a work of art. "Sarah Vance, will you marry me?" He knelt on one knee with the beautiful ring, and Sarah wept tears of joy. For about 30 seconds, she thought she was living in a fairy tale. Happy tears flowed freely. She nodded vigorously, unable to utter a word. In that moment, standing between heaven and earth, amidst the sprawling steel, Sarah believed she was the luckiest, happiest woman in the world. Her fairy tale had a perfect ending. However, that happiness did not last long. Then they went to tell his parents. And Lara's first words were, "Well, I suppose we will need to discuss a prenuptial agreement." The way she said it was very definitive, as if it were as natural as planning a wedding menu. Julian looked uncomfortable, but he did not argue. "Mother, can we at least celebrate first?" he asked. But Sarah could see he would not stand against her on this. That night, Lara called Sarah directly. "My dear Sarah, I hope you understand this is nothing personal. It is just that Julian has worked very hard to build his career, and given your circumstances, well, we need to protect what he has built. My circumstances was code for Sarah being black, working class, and not belonging to their world. Tomorrow, promptly at 10 o'clock, please come to my office so we can discuss this matter further." The tone was commanding, definitively brooking, no refusal, and then the line went dead before Sarah could say a word. Lara's office was on the top floor of the Croft Tower, a brutally minimalist space in shades of grey and black, overlooking the entire city. She sat behind a gigantic glass desk, looking more like a general than a businesswoman. "Sit," she commanded, without bothering to lift her head from a thick stack of documents. After a few breathless seconds of silence, she pushed a thick bundle of papers towards Sarah. "I assume we need to discuss a prenuptial agreement," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Julian is the sole heir to Croft Enterprises. We cannot allow personal feelings to affect the stability of an entire empire. This is to protect the family's assets and Julian's future." Every word she spoke felt like a cold shower, drenching Sarah's surging happiness. "Protect? From whom?" Sarah whispered, feeling unusually small and weak. Lara finally looked up, her eyes boring into Sarah, chilling her to the bone. "From unforeseen risks, Miss Vance. From unnecessary complications." Before Sarah could recover from that shock, true calamity struck, delivering continuous blows to her nascent career. First was an email. The investor of the Elysian Fields project, the largest project Julian had helped her secure, suddenly announced their withdrawal of funds. The reason they gave was vague: changes in business strategy. Not a single further explanation. All of Sarah's and her small team's efforts over the past 3 months were completely wasted. A few days later, another blow landed. Sarah's small architectural firm, Vance Designs, received notification that its consulting contract for another commercial project was terminated. This time, the project manager, a man who had always admired Sarah's talent, called her privately, his voice filled with regret. "I am sorry, Sarah," he said. "The order came from above. They said there was pressure from a mysterious investor. They would not say who it was, but their power is immense. I could do nothing else." Within a week, Sarah lost everything. Her office faced bankruptcy. The employees she had wholeheartedly recruited might lose their jobs. The dream Julian had helped her build suddenly vanished into thin air. Sarah, from a promising architect, became penniless, drowning in debt and despair, entirely dependent on Julian and his family. Was it all just coincidence? Or was this a chessboard cruelly arranged? Sarah looked at the prenuptial agreement lying on the coffee table, and then at Julian's anxious face when he came home that evening. The coincidence was terrifyingly perfect. Sarah was cornered. They did not just want her to sign a piece of paper. They wanted to strip her of everything, leaving her with nothing but Julian's love, so that she had no choice but to accept all their conditions. The coldness and decisiveness in this plan made Sarah shiver. She was facing not a difficult mother-in-law, but a ruthless strategist. The Croft family's law office was located in an ancient grey stone building, where the air was thick with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and silent power. This place was not designed to offer comfort. It was created to exert pressure, to remind people like Sarah of their place. Sarah sat on the cold leather chair, her hands clasped in her lap, feeling like a defendant awaiting judgment. Across from her was Mr. Sterling, the Croft family's lawyer, a man with meticulously combed silver hair and eyes devoid of emotion behind gold-rimmed glasses. Julian sat beside Sarah, one hand resting on her back, gently rubbing in circles. It was a gesture that should have provided comfort, but at that moment, it felt like an invisible chain. Mr. Sterling began explaining the terms of the agreement in a monotone, professional voice, as if he were reading a weather report. Yet, the words he uttered were a Category 5 hurricane devastating Sarah's world. Clause 4 amperes, he stated, pushing up his glasses, stipulates that Miss Vance shall have no claim to Mr. Croft's existing assets or future assets, including real estate, stock, and investments, regardless of the duration of the marriage. Sarah swallowed hard. Julian gently squeezed her shoulder. Clause 6b, he continued, turning to another page. In the event of divorce, Miss Vance shall not be entitled to alimony. Both parties shall be solely responsible for their own finances, not a single cent. They had calculated to ensure Sarah would leave empty-handed, as if she were merely a temporary guest in Julian's life. But the most ruthless clause was yet to come, a cunningly planted trap. And finally, Clause 9, the most crucial clause, Mr. Sterling emphasized, looking directly at Sarah for the first time. The inheritance clause. If Miss Vance inherits any assets valued over $100,000, she is obligated to inform the Croft family within 48 hours. The family will have the right to appoint a financial advisor to assist her in managing that estate. Sarah's mind buzzed. Assist? That was far too euphemistic a word for control. It was a tool to deprive Sarah of her inheritance, to ensure that anything she possessed would fall into their hands. This was not a prenuptial agreement. This was a declaration of distrust. This was a verdict pronouncing her a gold digger, a threat to be neutralized. It meant they saw Sarah as a threat, a gold digger, someone incapable of loving their son for who he truly was. It meant that in their eyes, Sarah was exactly what they expected. A poor black woman seeking advancement. Tears began to blur the words on the page. Sarah turned to Julian, searching for a flicker of hope, a sign of resistance. She wanted him to stand up, bang on the table, and say, "Enough," but he did not. He motioned for Mr. Sterling to pause, then turned to Sarah, leaning close to her ear, his voice a persuasive whisper. "My love," he began, his voice heartbreakingly gentle, "listen to me. My mother. She is a difficult and always worried person. This is just a formality to put her mind at ease. Do you think I care about these things?" He took Sarah's hand, her fingers cold in his warm palm. "This is just paperwork, Sarah. It means nothing. Our love, our future. It is not on this piece of paper. It is right here." He placed Sarah's hand on his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat. or at least what she believed was its sincere beat. "Your career has just encountered difficulties," he continued, his voice full of sympathy. "I will be by your side. We will rebuild everything, even better than before. But please, sign it, my dear. Consider it for me, so we can overcome this and start our lives peacefully. So my mother has no more reason to interfere." Every word he spoke was a stitch, simultaneously mending Sarah's broken heart and sewing her tightly into the cage they had created. He did not play the role of the enemy. He played the role of an ally, someone who would stand with Sarah against an external force, his mother. He transformed this humiliation into a test of love they had to overcome together. Cornered, her career shattered, her future uncertain, and the man she loved pleading before her, what other choice did Sarah have? To refuse meant losing him, losing the only lifeline she was clinging to. Sarah took the pen Mr. Sterling offered. It felt heavy in her hand, as if made of lead. She looked down at the blank line at the bottom, awaiting her signature. It was like a gaping mouth, ready to swallow Sarah's honor and self-respect. A tear fell onto the page, smudging the ink of a nearby letter. Julian squeezed Sarah's hand tighter. "It is okay," he whispered. With a trembling breath, Sarah signed her name. The handwriting was messy, no longer the strong, confident script of an architect. It was the handwriting of someone who had surrendered. The moment Sarah put the pen down, she saw a fleeting glimpse of relief on Julian's face before he managed to conceal it with a comforting smile. Mr. Sterling nodded professionally, collecting the documents as if he had just completed a routine business transaction. Sarah had been formally trapped. She had signed her own sentence, unaware that it would soon become a tool against her and also the key for her to find the truth. But at that moment, she felt only an extreme emptiness. She still signed. Sarah signed because she loved him, because she wanted to prove she was not what they thought, and because a part of her believed she deserved their suspicion. She signed with tears streaming down her face while Lara watched with a satisfied smile, as if she had won a game Sarah did not even know they were playing. 3 months after the wedding, Sarah was struggling to adapt to her new role, Mrs. Croft. It was a role she found incredibly awkward and out of place. She lived in a luxurious penthouse with Julian, surrounded by expensive but soulless items. Her architectural office had been forced to close, and she merely stayed home, attempting to sketch new ideas on paper. But the creative fire within her seemed to have dwindled. Sarah had everything one could dream of: a handsome, wealthy husband, a life free from financial worries, yet she had never felt more alone. And then, tragedy truly struck, without warning, like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was sitting by the window, looking down at the bustling traffic below, when her phone rang. It was the hospital's number. A strange, chillingly calm voice informed her that her father, Robert Vance, had suffered a sudden heart attack at work and was in critical condition. Sarah's world seemed to stop spinning. Sarah rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding in her chest. Julian also hurried there shortly after, embracing her, trying to reassure her, but Sarah heard nothing. Her mind was filled only with her father's image. Sarah's father. The only man in this world who was truly hers, her real family. He was an ordinary accountant at a small company, a gentle, quiet man who had lived his entire life in a rented apartment in a working-class neighborhood. After Sarah's mother passed away in a car accident when Sarah was young, he had raised her alone as a single parent. He had never been wealthy, but he had given her something more precious than money: unconditional love and lessons about self-respect and the value of honest labor. He was Sarah's silent hero, the steady rock she could always lean on. Sarah sat by his bedside, tightly holding his calloused hand, the hand that had worked tirelessly to raise her. His skin was pale, the wrinkles around his eyes seemed deeper, and his chest rose and fell weakly with the rhythm of the ventilator. She told him disjointed stories, pleading with him not to leave her alone. Julian sat beside her, occasionally placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder, but his presence at that moment felt distant. Her pain was too immense, too personal, no one could touch it. On the third day, Sarah's father briefly regained consciousness. His eyes opened, clouded but searching for her. He tried to speak, but only weak whispers emerged. Sarah leaned close to his mouth. "My dear daughter, when this is over, you need to go to the bank. The safety deposit box. Everything you need to know is in there." Those were his last words. 2 hours later, His heart stopped beating. Sarah's world crumbled. She was utterly alone. Julian was by her side, handling all the procedures, arranging the funeral. He acted as a considerate husband, a solid support. But amidst the overwhelming grief, Sarah felt an invisible wall between them. Her pain was real, while his comfort seemed merely a perfectly executed performance. The funeral was simple, just as Sarah's father had lived. A few neighbors, some of his old colleagues, and a few of Sarah's friends attended. The Croft family did not come. Lara said she did not want to draw unnecessary attention at such a sorrowful time. A week after the funeral, once her father's small apartment had been cleared out, Sarah remembered his dying wish. In the drawer of his old, worn desk, beneath a stack of papers, she found a simple metal key, attached to a small tag, inscribed with the number 314. At the same time, she received a call from a lawyer named Thompson, whom she had never heard of. "Miss Vance," he said in a solemn voice, "I have been your father, Robert Vance's, lawyer for the past 20 years. I believe he left you a key. When you are ready, please come to see me. There are important matters we need to discuss regarding his estate." An estate? Sarah almost laughed through her tears. Her father, an accountant living in a rented apartment, what estate could he possibly have? A few old pieces of furniture and an ancient Honda, but she decided to go anyway. Because it was her father's last wish, Sarah did not know that the small key in her hand would not only open a safe deposit box, it was about to open a door to a buried past, a shocking truth, and an enormous fortune that would change everything. Her father's death was not an end. It was the turning point. It was the key that unlocked the door to the truth and a colossal fortune. The bank branch Mr. Thompson directed Sarah to was located in the city's financial district, an old granite building with enormous columns, exuding an air of power and permanence. It was entirely unfamiliar to Sarah's father's world, or at least the world she knew of him. A sense of unease seeped into her as she stepped through the heavy bronze revolving door. A bank employee led Sarah down to the vault, passing through a steel door, a meter thick. The air down here was cold and still, with only the faint hum of the ventilation system. He used his key, along with Sarah's key number 314, to open a safe deposit box. When the metal door swung open, Sarah's heart pounded. Inside were not a few mementos or a small sum of savings, as Sarah had secretly imagined. The box was almost filled with documents, old notebooks, and a few photo boxes. Sarah's hands trembled as she took out the first document. It was an original contract, the paper yellowed with age. The typewritten words at the top stunned Sarah. Croft Enterprises Formation Agreement. She scrolled down to the signatures. There were two names. One was Arthur Croft, and the other name, clear and decisive, was Robert Vance. Sarah's mind reeled. According to the contract, her father was not merely a partner. He was the co-founder, holding 60% of the shares and the owner of all patents for the foundational construction technology that had made Croft Enterprises a household name. How could this be? Her father, a gentle accountant, the genius mind behind a real estate empire. Sarah tremblingly turned to the next documents. There were Swiss bank statements, stock certificates from blue-chip technology companies, investment portfolios worth millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions of dollars. In total, the sum far exceeded Sarah's imagination. Her father, the man who drove an old Honda and lived in a rented apartment, was a billionaire, an anonymous billionaire. But why? Why had he hidden everything? The answer lay in the carefully handwritten journals. Page by page, a dark story unfolded, a conspiracy of betrayal spanning 3 decades. Sarah's father and Arthur Croft had once been close friends, starting their business from scratch together. But then Lara appeared. She had seduced Arthur, who was already a married man at the time, and together they had plotted to seize control of the company. They had framed Sarah's father in a financial fraud he had not committed, pushing him onto a path to prison that did not materialize, but was enough to ruin his reputation. While Sarah's father struggled to prove his innocence, they used sophisticated legal maneuvers to transfer all his shares and patents into their names. Sarah's father lost everything in the blink of an eye, but he had not surrendered. After being exonerated, instead of directly confronting such an overwhelming force, he chose to live in seclusion. He secretly monitored them, quietly gathering every piece of evidence, every testimony. At the same time, He used a small portion of his remaining assets to invest wisely, creating a fortune even larger than what he had lost, all meticulously hidden. He lived a simple life to protect Sarah, to give her a normal childhood, untainted by hatred and danger. And then, Sarah found a file with Julian's name on it. Her father had been monitoring Julian as well. He knew Julian was not a prince who had appeared by chance. Sarah's father documented that the Croft family had known of her existence for a long time. Julian's approach to her was a deliberate plan, a carefully calculated move. Their goal was to control Sarah, Robert Vance's sole legitimate heir, before she could learn about her inheritance. The prenuptial agreement. Now Sarah understood that ruthless Clause 9 was not overcaution. It was their weapon, the final safeguard to ensure that even if Sarah discovered the truth, they would still control the assets. Everything flooded back into Sarah's mind. Arthur's uneasy gaze, Lara's disdain, the mysterious cancellations of her projects, and even Julian's seemingly perfect love. It was all just a play, an elaborately staged play, and Sarah was the only puppet unaware of her role. The love within Sarah died. The pain transformed into a cold fury. She sat in that chilly bank vault for hours, rereading every word, letting the bitter truth permeate every cell. That evening, Sarah decided to test Julian one last time. She returned to the penthouse, her face pale from crying. Julian rushed to her, asking worriedly. Sarah slumped onto the sofa, feigning exhaustion. "I just met my father's lawyer," she said, her voice faint. "Father, he left me a little savings, just a few tens of thousands of dollars, enough to pay off some old debts." Sarah looked directly into his eyes, searching for a reaction. For a brief moment, she saw a flicker of relief in his eyes, a relief that could not be concealed. It lasted only a second before he managed to replace it with a sympathetic expression. "Oh, my love," he said, pulling Sarah into his arms. "That is good then. At least you have something. But listen," he looked at Sarah seriously. "The past is over. Let us forget it and live for the present, for our future. Do not let old matters trouble you anymore. Forget the past." His words were like a dagger stabbing Sarah's heart. He did not want her to forget the pain of losing her father. He wanted her to forget her inheritance. The panic and deceit in his eyes, though very cleverly masked, confirmed everything. He knew he was part of the conspiracy. That night, Sarah lay beside him, the man she once loved with her entire being. But it felt as though she was lying beside a stranger, an enemy. She no longer cried. The innocent, fragile Sarah had died in that bank vault that day. A new Sarah had been born from the ashes of betrayal, and in her mind, a plan had begun to form. That night, Sarah did not sleep. She lay motionless on the expensive silk bed, beside the man who was her husband in name but her sworn enemy. She listened to his steady breathing and felt a coldness spread from her very bones. Her tears had run dry, leaving only a smoldering fire of hatred and an iron resolve. The innocent Sarah, the girl who had signed the humiliating contract out of blind love, was dead. A new Sarah had been born from the ashes of betrayal, an heiress not only to a billion-dollar fortune but also to a blood debt that needed to be claimed. The next morning, Sarah awoke before Julian. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were still swollen, but her gaze was different, no longer dreamy or weak. It was sharp, focused, and full of calculation. She put on a powerful black suit she had never dared to wear, and her hair was neatly tied in a high bun. When Julian awoke, he looked at Sarah with surprise. "Where are you going so early?" he asked. "I have some personal matters to resolve," Sarah replied, her voice cold, without a hint of explanation. She was no longer the small wife who needed his permission. The first thing Sarah did was not to cry or confront. It was to act. She went to see Mr. Thompson, giving him all of her father's journals and evidence. The old lawyer, who had been loyal to Sarah's father for 2 decades, read them with clear indignation on his face. "We will not only seek justice for your father, Miss Puffdare Vance," he said, his voice resolute. "We will make them pay for every single one of their actions." Under his guidance, Sarah hired not just one, but an entire team of the city's best lawyers, specializing in finance, corporate law, and criminal law. They were like an army, working day and night in a temporary office she rented under a different name. With the almost limitless financial resources her father had left behind, Sarah began her first move, Quietly, through shell companies, she began to buy back the old architectural firm that had fired her. The former CEO, who had once disdained Sarah, was now astonished to learn that the new owner was his former employee. She did not fire him, she kept him, forcing him to work under her, a daily humiliation. Next, Sarah began acquiring shares of Croft Enterprises that were floating on the market. Every day, a large volume of stock was transferred into her secret investment funds. She was like a silent shark swimming beneath the surface, while the Croft family was still blissfully unaware on their luxurious yacht that the hull was about to be torn apart. And then, an unexpected turn of events occurred, a move even Sarah had not anticipated. Her lawyer received a call. It was from Arthur Croft's personal lawyer. Mr. Arthur wanted to meet Sarah, a secret meeting, without Lara or Julian knowing. They met in a small, secluded coffee shop in an alley. Arthur Croft, in front of Sarah, looked much older and wearier than she had ever seen him. The torment of 30 years had etched itself onto his face. He dared not look Sarah directly in the eye. "I know no apology is enough," he began, his voice trembling. "Robert, your father, was my best friend. I have lived in hell ever since that day." He confessed that his conscience had tormented him for years. Witnessing his wife and son continue to use such ruthless tactics against Sarah, the daughter of his closest friend, was the final straw. He could no longer bear it. "I cannot let it continue," he said, and this time he looked at Sarah, his eyes red-rimmed. "I betrayed your father once. I cannot stand by and watch them destroy you too." Then he slid a small USB drive across the table towards Sarah. "This is an audio recording of a conversation between me and Lara a few weeks ago, after I learned of your father's passing. I asked her about the old affair. She admitted everything. She even boasted about how she framed your father and deceived me." Sarah took the USB drive, feeling as though she was holding a time bomb. This was the ultimate weapon, undeniable evidence. Arthur Croft, the former accomplice, had now become Sarah's most important ally. Sarah's revenge plan now had its final and perfect piece. She was no longer a lone victim. She was a hunter with an ally, with a weapon, and with a clear objective. The drama was nearing its climax, and Sarah would be the director of the most shocking exposé this city had ever witnessed. The Croft family had prepared for a storm, but they did not know that Sarah was the storm itself. The setting was the opulent grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, where the Croft Enterprises' 30th anniversary gala was underway. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the clinking of glasses, and the lively chatter of the elite. Colossal crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow, reflecting off glittering evening gowns and elegant tuxedos. At the center of the stage stood the Croft Enterprises logo, a symbol of power and success. This was their night to parade their empire before the world. Lara and Julian stood at the heart of it all, like the queen and prince of a dynasty. Lara, in a sleek silver gown, exuded cold pride. Julian, suave and charming, was smiling and shaking hands with investors. Sarah stood in the shadows at the back of the ballroom, observing them. As Mrs. Croft, her presence was mandatory, but they were too absorbed in their own limelight to notice their quiet daughter-in-law. They did not know that tonight, Sarah was not here as part of the family. She was here as an executioner. When Lara Croft stepped onto the podium, the entire ballroom fell silent. She spoke of a 30-year journey, of vision, of dedication. She thanked her husband, Arthur, who sat in the front row with an impassive expression. She praised her son, Julian, the brilliant heir who would take Croft Enterprises to new heights. She was the embodiment of success, an unshakable queen. As her speech concluded and applause erupted, Sarah began to act. "Please wait a moment." Sarah's voice, amplified by a microphone she had prepared, echoed throughout the ballroom. All sounds abruptly ceased. Hundreds of eyes turned towards Sarah as she slowly emerged from the shadows, advancing towards the stage. Lara and Julian looked at her, stunned. Displeasure was evident on Lara's face. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Julian whispered, trying to maintain his smile. Sarah ignored him. She stepped onto the stage, standing right beside Lara, facing the entire audience. "Good evening," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "I am Sarah Vance. Perhaps some of you know me as Sarah Croft." A murmur arose. "Today, we celebrate 30 years of Croft Enterprises' success." But in the recent speech, Mrs. Croft inadvertently omitted a name, a very important name. Sarah signaled to her technician backstage. On the colossal LED screen behind the stage, where the company logo had just been displayed, an old photograph suddenly appeared. The photo showed two young men, standing in front of a small office, shoulder to shoulder, their smiles full of ambition. One was a younger Arthur Croft. The other name, clear and decisive, was Sarah's father, Robert Vance. "We have forgotten to honor one person," Sarah continued, her voice filled with emotion. "A co-founder, a genius who laid the foundation for everything we have today. His name was Robert Vance, my father." The ballroom was completely silent. Lara's face turned pale. Julian stood frozen. "Perhaps you are wondering why such an important name has been forgotten for 30 years. Sarah smiled bitterly. "Allow me to tell you a story." On the screen, evidence began to appear, one by one. The original contract with Sarah's father's name and his 60% share. Pages from his journal, scanned and magnified, detailing the betrayal plot. Evidence of the financial fraud that the Croft family had framed him for. Astonishment and angry whispers began to spread throughout the hall. Journalists started aiming their cameras. Just then, the main doors of the ballroom burst open. A team of uniformed police officers, led by two detectives, parted the crowd and advanced directly towards the stage. Their arrival caused the temporary chaos to subside, replaced by a tense silence. Mr. Thompson, Sarah's father's loyal lawyer, was already standing there, holding a folder of documents. Mrs. Lara Croft, Mr. Julian Croft, one of the two detectives spoke, his voice resounding clearly. "You are under arrest for charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit a crime." Lara let out a wild scream as a female officer stepped forward to handcuff her. Julian did not resist. He allowed them to handcuff him, his eyes lifelessly looking at Sarah one last time, a gaze mixed with hatred, fear, and a bitter acknowledgement of defeat. They were led away through the stunned crowd, past camera lenses recording every moment of this humiliating downfall. The Croft empire ended not with a bang, but with a cold click. The next morning, news of the Croft family's scandal of the century saturated all newspapers and television channels. Croft Enterprises' stock plummeted uncontrollably, losing over 80% of its value in just one trading session. The empire they had built on lies collapsed like a sandcastle before a tide. Several months later, as the legal storms gradually subsided, a new order was established. With her father's legitimate shares, combined with the stock she had quietly acquired, Sarah became the largest shareholder, wielding absolute control. In an extraordinary shareholders' meeting, she was elected the new chairman. The first thing Sarah did was to rename the company. It was no longer Croft Enterprises. Now, it bore the name Vance Croft Initiative. The name Croft was retained, not to honor them, but as a permanent reminder of the past, of the deceit from which something new and genuine had been built. Vance was placed first, restoring her father's rightful position. Now, Sarah's office was Lara's former office, but she had completely redesigned it. Gone were the cold grey and black. Instead, it was an open space with natural light, warm wood, and many green plants. On the walls, instead of soulless abstract paintings, were her architectural blueprints and a large portrait of her father, Robert Vance, with a gentle smile. Every day, from her office window, Sarah could see the construction site of the Viridian gradually taking shape. The building from her rejected design of yesteryear, her brainchild, was now soaring into the sky, a symbol of rebirth and triumph. Sarah still kept that prenuptial agreement. It was carefully framed and placed in her desk drawer. Occasionally, she would take it out to look at it. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was a valuable lesson, a reminder of her self-worth, a value that could not be determined by anyone or any piece of paper. It was proof of a truth. Sometimes, the very things created to bind you are what give you the strength to free yourself. They wanted a contract to protect their empire from a poor girl, but ultimately, that very contract inadvertently ignited the flame, pushing Sarah not only to reclaim justice but also to build an empire of her own. An empire built on the foundation of truth, honor, and her father's legacy. The battle had ended. Sarah did not just win, she found herself again. A queen was born, not from royal lineage, but from the ashes of betrayal, and this This was just the beginning.